So whether you're just AI curious or you're a hardcore 5D ChatGPT prompt engineer, you've probably been blown away at some point by the amazing results that AI models can produce. But of course, they're not without their shortcomings. But today I'm here to talk about one particular flaw. AI is bad at languages, and the ways that it's bad may reveal some fundamental flaws with the ways that we use AI now and in the future. But language is a huge category, so what do I even mean by that? Well, for starters, I'm not talking about using AI chat models to practice conversation in a language that you're learning. From what I've seen, that can actually be a pretty useful and cool tool to play around with. And obviously, I can't be talking about translation because translation is obviously one of the first and most famously successful use cases for machine learning and AI, right? So if you clicked on this video, you probably have at least a passing interest in AI, which means I probably don't have to give you the definition of generative AI. Generative AI refers to a type of artificial intelligence model that produces text, images, or other output in response to prompts by using complex algorithms to essentially predict what word, pixel, or frequency should go where and at what time. It does this based on patterns that it's learned from vast amounts of data that it's been trained on. So you may have realized at some point that Google Translate went from being a total joke to being shockingly usable. Well, the reason for this is that in 2016, Google went from using an SMT system to an NMT system, which had the effect of greatly improving the naturalness and the accuracy of translations when it comes to well-resourced languages. And of course, other programs like DeepL and eventually ChatGPT began creating translations using essentially the same process. That's right, 2016. So back when you were listening to Side to Side from Ariana Grande, Google was moving words from side to side, because that's what translate means literally, if you etymology. And the results can definitely be super impressive. However, I'd like to share one particularly outrageous experience that I had very recently using these machine translation tools. So as you may know, if you're one of my 120 subscribers, in my last video, I recounted a story where I got mugged in Ecuador, my wife and I. And since I recorded that video in Spanish, I had to have the subtitles translated into English to make it more accessible. And I decided to make it a little bit easier on myself by using ChatGPT. So imagine my surprise when it decided to just straight up hallucinate an entire section of my story that never happened. So I decided to do some further experimenting with AI translation tools to see how effective they were. And while, once again, the results were sometimes pretty impressive, it did still have a shocking propensity to just make up stuff and insert it as if it was already there in the original material. For example, ChatGPT inserting items into a list that were never there in the original. And it also does struggle and produce some of the same errors that Google Translate and other software that's been around for a while does. And this is particularly a problem when it comes to low resource languages. But the big problem is that if ChatGPT makes a mistake, it not only doubles down, but it also provides a eerily convincing but completely fabricated explanation for why that's the case. And the problem that this reveals is what I'm referring to as the unverified output problem. There's a really interesting paper entitled ChatGPT is BS, which goes into some of the issues surrounding ChatGPT and other AI language models and the output they produce, as well as its relationship to the truth. But long story short, it's widely recognized that AI models can make up facts, hallucinate quotes from experts, or convey things in a misleading way. Everyone, including the companies that produce these models, recognize that this is a problem, and as far as I can tell, there's no solutions that have been proposed. And the thing is, since language is one of the most fundamental barriers that divides people and separates us from information, it can be super tempting to imagine that there's a program that can just eliminate this barrier with one click.
Any invasion of Taiwan starts with this document. It basically says that if Taiwan tries to assert its independence from China, or, and this is the most important part, or if the possibilities for a peaceful reunification should be completely exhausted, that China shall employ non-peaceful means and other necessary measures to protect China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Translation: if they run out of diplomatic solutions, China is required by law to invade Taiwan and force it to reunite with China. And no, I don't read or speak Mandarin, but Google Translate, I mean, come on.
But unfortunately, language barriers are also the fundamental thing that make it impossible for the average person to verify whether or not the translation they received is accurate or even makes sense. One of the ideal use cases for AI technology is eliminating the need for special services such as translators, but with the problem of hallucinations being, as far as I can tell, a fundamental flaw of AI translations, I'm not sure how anyone can trust the results that they get. Which brings me to another way that AI comes up short when it comes to languages. Now, I recognize that this next thing is going to be a fairly niche complaint, but I promise it does have implications for how you use AI. Because one of the major use cases for AI is for research purposes, because it can take all the vast amounts of data that has been trained on basically the entirety of the internet and focus it into answering your one question. And since I always have random linguistics questions that are frustratingly difficult to Google at times, I thought it might be a good idea to test it by asking it a simple historical linguistics question. What are some examples of a regular sound change in Spanish? And sure enough, it provided 3 very well-formatted, distinct examples, including such linguistic terms as velar and voiceless and bilabial. Unfortunately, each of these examples was complete nonsense, which left me unfortunately super doubtful of this technology as a research tool in general. But it's important to note that that was almost 2 years ago, and as we all know, AI has been advancing at like an incredibly fast pace when it comes to improving its quality. So I decided to give it another try to see how it does. And spoiler alert, while it did provide more useful information this time around, it was still riddled with a fair amount of complete nonsense. And in some ways, that's even more troubling because it means if you're a kid trying to cheat on your homework or if you're a person genuinely trying to educate yourself on a new topic, you're going to have to fact check each of the facts that are presented. And I just feel like nobody's doing that. So the wider problem is that each of these issues, the one of unverified output and unreliable results, is not one that just affects translation or language or whatever stuff I'm interested in. Now, I'll admit, I actually did enjoy to some extent the exchange and going back and forth when it came to the topics that I was prompting ChatGPT about. And I'll actually provide a link to those conversations in case anyone's curious to see how they went. And I could also see how it could be a useful tool for people who are very knowledgeable about a particular subject, who are just looking for a basis or a starting point for research or a way to explain certain concepts in a way that might be palatable to people. But as far as I can tell, the grand vision for AI from the people who are like super high on it isn't just for it to be an extremely useful research tool for people who are knowledgeable in a subject, but it's for it to completely replace the need for specialists at all. You can be your own doctor, you can be your own lawyer.
Google Translate, I mean, come on.
And of course, you can be your own translator. And while the refrain from AI enthusiasts is that AI is the worst it's ever going to be, which may be true, although between efforts to poison AI and the threat of model collapse, that may also not necessarily be true. The problem of hallucinations seems to be, as far as I can tell, fundamental and unsolvable. Also, full disclosure, I am a translator and an interpreter, but I promise this whole video wasn't just copium. I'm genuinely curious to see where this technology goes and if it's going to be possible for them to eliminate some of these fundamental issues and flaws, not to mention the legal and moral gray area involved in the data harvesting itself. And while I don't feel like my personal job is at risk, I do sometimes think and worry about the mistakes that are inevitably going to get made, some of which are probably going to be life-threatening due to overzealous early adoption and over-reliance on AI language tools. But I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts. Do any of you guys use AI in either your personal life or in your work? Have you noticed any issues with the unverified output problem? And do you have ways that you get around it? And if you're particularly knowledgeable about the subject, do you see a way that the fundamental flaw of hallucinations can be eliminated for good? Also, please remember to like if you subscribe, to subscribe if you liked it, and to leave a comment if you are going to leave a comment. And I've been Daniel. Thank you for watching. Bye. So that's right. Back in 2016, back when you were listening to Rihanna work, Google was working on improving their translation quality. That's right. Back in 2016, so while you were listening to Drake have a one dance, Google Translate was using neural networks to give themselves a chance at doing a good job at translation.